Hi everybody. I hope you're enjoying that nice, calm, soothing music, hopefully. Lovely, lovely, lovely to see you this afternoon. Thanks so much for being here. Really lovely to see lots of people that I know from other circles and things, but also lots of people that I don't know. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Lovely to see you. Thank you. Great. So we'll start promptly, and I'll make sure we're finished at 3 because I know some people need to dash off and get kids from school and other meetings and all sorts of things. So we'll make sure we do that. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Holmes. I work at Liverpool Hope University teaching early childhood, and also I am involved in research in the Nurturing Young Faith programme there. So looking at how we can support children in their faith journeyings and how we can foster kind of good nurture of their faith as well. And I've been involved particularly over the last year, whilst sitting at home, watching everything unfolding with the pandemic. I wanted to look at what was the response of the church to this situation from a children's ministry and family ministry perspective. So I've done various bits of research over the time. I've spoken to many of you as well, so thank you if you were involved in that. Firstly, I looked at how the immediate response, which was incredible, sort of lots of people producing things onto YouTube and recording things and so on. Then after that, I spoke to many different practitioners, regional advisors, people who produced material, parents, grandparents and so on. And I've also been a little bit involved in discussing this all with a few people in different countries too. So the Netherlands, South Africa, and Norway and Poland particularly, so kind of looking at how the responses compare. So I'm going to be kind of drawing on all of that today, and just kind of sharing with you some of the insights that I've seen. And I'm sorry to say I don't have the answer, that magic bullet, I'm afraid, but I'll be sharing with you some of the trends that I've observed, some of the patterns that I've seen, and kind of perhaps some of the gaps and some of the opportunities, so that I know that many of you are involved in shaping the vision and strategy for your church's children and family work. Many of you are involved in doing that regionally. Many of you provide training, write resources and things like that. So I'm kind of hoping I can sort of share some of what I've seen so that you can all go off and use your amazing skills and creativity to develop and to continue to see the children and family ministry thriving, really. So that's the plan for today, and we'll have a little comfort break about halfway through, hopefully as well. So just a few things. You can have your cameras off or on, I don't mind, but if you could stay muted, that would be great. If anybody would find it helpful, we've got closed captions available, so subtitling from everything I say. So if you go at the bottom of the screen, it should say closed captions with a little arrow, I think, and you click on that and select view subtitle or something. So you can use that if you want to. We won't do breakout groups because I think that can get a little bit awkward sometimes in a group of this size, but I'd love you to contribute in the chat. If you sort of think of something that's relevant, feel free to pop it in there. I won't be able to read it while I'm talking, but other people will, and that's great, and I'll make sure I read it later as well. Super. So just while we're getting started, I'm just going to launch a little poll to find out how you're feeling, both personally, but also in a kind of ministerial role as well. So if you have a little go at that poll just for a moment, that would be great. Super, we've got lots of responses, so I'll just give you another moment there, just while we get started. Wonderful. Lots of you feeling okay, that's good. Quite a few feeling great, which is wonderful. Quite a few exhausted though and fed up as well, which I totally understand. I think that's very widely a feeling that people are having. But it's great to see that your children's teams are feeling hopeful, but also quite cautious and quite uncertain. That as well is understandable there. So that's great. And Thank you for your responses. What do you think are the most significant issues? So quite a fairly even spread across there. I forgot to say this is an anonymous poll there, so that's fine. So yeah, pretty much all of the factors there, which I thought might be issues, are issues. So interesting to see there some of your responses. So thank you for that. We'll end that now, and you can see the results if you're interested. I think you can scroll through there. Super. Well, let's crack on then, and I'll share some of the things that I have noticed in the conversations and things that I've been involved in. Here on the first slide, oops, I'll just show you here. These are some of the things I've noticed. I'm sure nothing here will surprise you. These are what I've perhaps called the marks of COVID on our ministries. Probably many of you can relate and connect with these. So many children's teams that I've spoken to are feeling quite despondent, quite disillusioned, frustrated. Some saying they're depressed. Some are really struggling with this whole thing of the constantly changing rules, and how any idea that you have is very short-lived and has to be constantly changed and revised going forward. But also perhaps some reduced teams and funding, because when I spoke to a whole range of children's ministry leaders in November, they were talking about how significant numbers of volunteers, perhaps a third in many cases of their team, had withdrawn. That was for various reasons, of course, but of course this was very frustrating and very limiting at a time when we're wanting to try to be creative with our ministry. Of course, furloughing workers has fed into this issue as well, in terms of reduced team, and perhaps teams struggling to know what the direction is if perhaps their diocesan worker has been furloughed as well, because I know many are still on even part furlough, even if they are back there. Funding as well, of course, is a huge issue. Often, but particularly so at the moment. And segregated ministries, this thing of adults and children being separate. Many of you will have advocated for years to try to have adults and children together, worshipping and experiencing faith together and so on. And it seems that COVID has unfortunately gone against that, and has put up so many barriers, which have sort of underlined and kind of caused this segregated thing to be even more of an issue than usual. So that perhaps online it's easier if adults and children are separate. And now many, of course, I know there are some exceptions, there's some wonderful examples, and it'd be great to hear about those. But also, as people are starting to return to face-to-face work, it is really challenging to try and do things together. So I think this segregated ministries is quite a mark. And then exhausted parents. I don't think I need to really say any more than that. But I think there is a big disconnect there, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, in terms of our sort of expectations of parents as a church, expecting of parents, but the reality of parents, many parents, not all, being completely exhausted. And decreased engagement from parents. And that partly connects with the exhausted thing, but also just kind of a general feeling as part of the pandemic. So the Barnum Institute over in America, they researched with adults and found that 32% of practicing Christians had decreased their church contact, whether online or offline, as a result of the pandemic. That's a huge amount. And it may be, we don't know for sure, but it may be that may be kind of mirrored within children and families as well. And I think all of this has led to quite a bit of marginalisation for some groups, particularly the younger ones. Many of you will have had the challenges of under fives ministry and how to do that. But even children who are sort of 5, 6, 7 and who have struggled to connect in, and perhaps children with special needs and many others. So we'll talk a bit more about all of these things later. But these are some of the things that I have observed as marks of COVID through my conversations and observations and so on. And I think we often talk about gaps and about sort of disparity in our culture, in our society. We talk about educational gaps, we talk about poverty gaps and so on. But I do really think that there is quite a spiritual poverty, really, quite a spiritual gap going on at the moment. And so I've put here a few comments about how some of these gaps may be seen. So this first one here about diverse experiences. from looking and speaking to children and families, it's clear that for some families, they've had very minimal contact with the church or even with any kind of faith sort of activity or awareness throughout this whole time. Perhaps they've literally never heard the word God mentioned at home or in any arena at all in this whole time of the pandemic. And on the other side, other extreme of that, we see that perhaps some children have had increased contact. So perhaps families have really said, yes, absolutely, great, we're going to throw ourselves into this and really be very intentional about nurturing faith in the home. Or even families who have struggled to attend church in the past may have found it easier online, so they've had increased contact. But whichever way you look at it, there's that extreme diversity of experiences. Also, access issues. So over here we see this. Obviously, technology is an issue, but even things like children who are in care it's not appropriate for their video to be on screen, or perhaps their name. Those are kind of barriers for some families that I spoke to. And then this issue of adult gatekeepers. If adults are busy or doing something, or they don't want their children to attend the midweek Bible study or whatever it is online, then they don't. And so that's a real barrier. It's quite a different problem than it is for young people who can just log on their mobile phone themselves and so on. So for children, that's quite a significant issue. And then over here on the other side, some of the barriers and gaps. I've already mentioned children and adults in many settings are quite separate, but in other settings we've seen some amazing examples of families being ministered to as family units and exploring faith together in that way. Some children with special needs have found it helpful because it just removes a lot of barriers that they usually would have by attending church. Some have encountered that as a problem. And then there's the diversity in terms of where a church's group of people are very scattered geographically. That makes it really challenging to keep contact. Whereas if it's kind of the local parish church, it's much easier to pop out and visit families and drop off bags and all that kind of thing. So all of these different things have led to quite a lot of gaps and disparity. And as I mentioned the word, perhaps a spiritual poverty in some cases. And so I wonder if you would perhaps want to type in the chat, what are some of the biggest needs that you see in your context for children and families in terms of ministry? That would be really interesting to see if your sort of context matches with what I've been sort of hearing as well. So we'll move on now to the next slide. And through my conversations with all the different children and family workers and so on, there was quite a clear feeling coming through, like I said, about this disparity of experience, and that every single child has had obviously a very different experience through the pandemic. And so I've done a few pictures here. I was sort of playing around with it, trying to think what are some of the impacts of all of this. And so this was coming up from the conversations. So for a child, as this picture shows, with little or no engagement in any of these areas, so it's quite small print, so I'll read it just in case. Family faith is the top one, church discipleship, and then faith role models. So in each of these areas, in this scenario, the child hasn't really had very much input during the whole of the pandemic, and therefore the area, which is the kind of the arrow going forwards, the child's individual faith, is quite a small box. And what I mean by that is there's not been very many opportunities for the child to explore and develop and for their faith to thrive. The second scenario on the top right here is actually looking at children who've been involved in church discipleship throughout the pandemic, but actually not much has happened in the home, and they've not had many other adults involved in their faith. And the impact of that, people were reporting, is that actually, that not surprisingly, their faith would have had more opportunity to grow and to thrive. The third scenario here is if we look at family faith, and if families have not, for whatever reason, accessed church during this time, but they have really consciously and deliberately targeted and given a lot of investment to the whole area of family faith. And we see there that many of the practitioners that I was talking to were saying that actually has given children a much broader and richer, in most cases, opportunity to develop their faith. I know there's always exceptions to these things. And the fourth category, which all of the participants that I spoke to said was the ideal scenario, was that, of course, in each of these areas, the child would have had opportunities. So there would have been content in the home, there would have been connection with the church, and there would have been also a few, at least, faith role models. So people who the child could look to and see as kind of faith, living out their faith. And that this would provide the child with the best outcomes, if you like, with the best possibilities of developing their faith. And so in a way, it's quite a simple thing, but I think hopefully it helps us to think about how each child's faith journey will have been very different during this time. I wonder what it will look like for a child who has never, or throughout this 12 months or so, has not engaged at all with church activities or any faith in the home, and suddenly arrives in your church one Sunday morning. How will they? But then also we need to be aware that for children who have, for children who haven't been at church, which most haven't physically been in, sorry, I think my internet's a little bit glitchy, sorry for that there, that actually the church is no longer a familiar, safe place for them. And perhaps people they once saw as role models every single Sunday, these people who pray, I think they have a wonderful faith, now they view them as strangers. And so we need to think about how we can build those connections again in the church context. And so I really think that we need to be identifying amongst the children that we work with, what are their individual faith experience, what have they been during this year, and therefore how can we meet their needs according to those. Of course, schools have had this same problem, because when you send people off to do home learning, you're going to get a whole range of things. And so as you know, I'm sure schools are doing all sorts of tests and things to find out where the gaps are. And as our local head teacher was saying, this term we are gap filling, and this is what they're doing. And I don't think faith and spirituality is quite the same as that. It's not as simplistic, it's not as kind of linear, but somehow we need to be doing that. We need to be kind of finding out where are our children at spiritually, and how can we then connect very specifically and in a very targeted way with that. And I think the main way to do that is through conversation, through listening to them, through just giving time individually and in small groups to that. And so I think this model sort of really calls for a very intentional awareness of individuality amongst the children. We can't assume, we can't presume, but we need to be listening. But also we need to be supporting these families and working together with them, all of the families that we're involved with. And so this kind of team approach is obviously really tricky when everybody's exhausted, and the parents, many of them, will actually just want to drop their kids off to us. And so that is challenging of how that happens. But I really think that is something well worth giving time to at this stage, when people are starting to return, starting to transition back, starting to reconnect, to actually give that time to individual conversations to find out how this has been from a faith perspective, and therefore how can we kind of move forward with this. And so another thing it'd be interesting for you to pop in the chat is, what ways do you find collaborating with parents works? How do you find it works well? What kind of strategies and so on do you find in terms of kind of working with parents? That will be really helpful for other people to see. So thinking now about working with families. So some of you will be chatting, putting some things in the chat. That's great, of ways that work well. These are some of the things that came up in my research in terms of some of the issues. Now, I'm a mum myself. I've got 4 children, one of whom is about to turn 2 this weekend, which is very exciting. He's kind of been largely hidden away for most of those 2 years. And myself and my husband both working, and obviously homeschooling. So those first 6 months were way beyond exhausting and grueling and draining. And so I can really connect and understand with parents who say, I just can't comprehend how to add faith into this, everything that I'm juggling. Of course, then we had all different phases of schools being back, not being back, activities being on. Throughout this, we've had our support systems reduced as families. So for us anyway, grandparents, we have to be aware of their health issues. So we've kind of lost a lot of that sort of perhaps support that we would have had in that way. Even just lift sharing amongst families and so on has been reduced. Trying to stay as parents emotionally strong for their children and try and help them through has been so challenging. So all these things have led to this kind of really exhausting experience. And And I think as we open up as churches, we need to be very aware that we cannot expect these families to return with their pre-lockdown commitment to church because they're so exhausted. And I think this is a huge tension that we have. As churches, we have this mindset of serving. We kind of love it when people volunteer and get involved, especially in our children's ministry, but we need to be realistic about the needs of each of the families of volunteers. And every family will, of course, navigate this differently, but it's something we need to be very, very aware of. And here we have a picture there, this huge disconnect, because as I spoke to parents, I heard all of this exhaustion coming through. And as I spoke to church leaders, children's leaders, this kind of thing, again, there was this kind of thing, well, this is the opportunity for parents to rise up and to be the spiritual kind of leaders for their children, the spiritual guides for them. But actually for many, many parents, that is just something they don't feel able to do for a variety of reasons. They're juggling a million and one things. How on earth can they fit in a 10-minute Bible story or even a conversation, a difficult conversation about what's when we die? And so actually we can't kind of, so it's really difficult to kind of assume what's going on. So we need to kind of broach that carefully as we're navigating with our volunteers and so on. The next thing that was coming up was very much linking in with the last point, that many Christian parents felt ill-equipped and disempowered. So there has been a huge amount of resourcing in recent years into family faith, and it's so exciting for me to see. It's something that I'm really, really passionate about. And you kind of, I sit here and I think, why do people feel ill-equipped? Why do they feel like that? Because there's so many resources available. But I think when we delve a bit deeper, it will help us to understand. Because I reflect on my the first 6 months of the lockdown, pandemic, school closures, and I was busily trying to homeschool my kids. And we were seeing all this thing in the media and the messages from my school, probably many schools around the country, that just do your best, parents. You know, just do what you can for this time, and we'll sort it out later. It was all that kind of message, and you know, just do it. It's okay. Just look after their mental health and do what you can with education. We'll sort it out. And also there was this kind of very much spoon feeding, a lot of rigidness about it, kind of dictating. Do this sheet. Get them to do that sheet. Get them to watch this film, and then you're done. And actually that's not very empowering for parents. And I actually found it a great opportunity to be kind of discovering how my kids learn and what they like to learn. And my eldest loved doing, or still loves doing, posters. So for her, it was a great afternoon activity, set to a different theme every week, and she'd go off and research it and spend loads of time doing a really detailed poster. And we had every door of our downstairs was covered in posters by the end. But she learned so much from that. And actually, to have done some of the other things that the school provided wouldn't have met her needs quite so well. So I was a bit of a naughty parent and didn't do everything we were told, I'm afraid. But actually, I wonder if we do that kind of thing with our parents in the church, perhaps without realizing that we're saying, oh, just do what you can, but we're the professionals, we know what we're doing, we're the experienced people as children's leaders, as diocesan workers, as children's workers, whatever it is. And I wonder if we are contributing to this problem of not empowering parents, of kind of conveying this kind of sense that if you just give us your children, we will sort them out spiritually and hand them back to you. Almost this idea as well that children need to be in a separate room out the back, or they can't have a spiritual experience with you, with adults, and it's got to be a separate thing. And of course, I've got nothing against professional children's workers. I've done lots of training, and shout out to all the Cliff College people and so on, where I've done a lot of courses. Absolutely brilliant. But I think we just need to be a bit kind of careful about what messages we are conveying, and if we are inadvertently disempowering the parents that we are working with. And so alongside that, then, how do we equip and empower these parents? Well, I think to be intentionally aware of the demands upon them. And I've put that word intentionally in because I think everybody would say, yes, we're aware, of course we care, of course we know what's going on. But to actually acknowledge that to let the parents know that we recognise that. So to pray in the service, to send them a message and say, you know, we know that it's really hard. Oh, they're going back to school this week, praying for you in that. How has it been? How was, you know, this, that, and the other, rather than kind of saying to them, okay, this week, can you build a paper mache temple, please? Or, you know, can you contribute to this? You get your kids to do something for the fundraising challenge, or to video something. That's my biggest nightmare. If somebody asks me to get my kids to video something, they love it, but less so me, because it always takes about 25 takes and it just never goes quite to plan. It takes so long. So we need to be aware of that in a very deliberate kind of way, but also listen to their exact needs. Perhaps they just want to chat. Perhaps they don't know how to pray with their children and they're a bit embarrassed to say that. Perhaps you could just say to them, you know, here's a few ideas about this. Perhaps they don't have a child-friendly Bible in their house. We don't know this until we chat. Perhaps they're struggling with their child's behaviour and want to discuss that. Perhaps their child is at that stage of asking lots and lots of questions and they don't know how to answer them. And, you know, how can we support them in that? How can we listen to their exact needs? But actually also, how can we meet those needs at a time that suits them? So often I was hearing about, you know, parents who were saying, well, you know, people say they'll help me, but I'm not available until 9 p.m. at night, you know, and the time when somebody will phone me up for a chat from church is, you know, between 9 and 5 kind of thing. And I absolutely, you know, we need to have boundaries on time and be careful we're not working morning, noon and night. But, you know, if the only time that parents can speak to us, can chat and so on, is once the kids are all in bed, perhaps we need to try to meet those needs at that time, and recommend resources in a tailored way. So one of the things that came out very, very clearly through the research was that, particularly in the early days, we tended to bombard parents with loads and loads of resources and really good ideas and really good websites. And actually it was hugely overwhelming. For me, when I get emails like that, I'm afraid I often don't even look at them because it's just too much. And so instead, perhaps we could actually listen to their needs and then go off looking ourselves, be aware of what's around, and really recommend in a very tailored way how a resource or something that would help the family, and then follow up on that, you know, in a couple of weeks. How did you get on with that? Did it not work? Oh, okay, here's another thing you could try. And so to really be that sort of conduit to help parents and families find specific resources which will help them. And also to show that you care and support, which overwhelmingly this was something that churches were reporting they were seeking to do and they were wanting to do, and parents were saying they felt this. But I've added on the term long term there, and I think that's really important as the pandemic has stretched on and on and on, and we're all just getting fed up and nobody's got any news anymore, because although now things are changing a bit, but actually we need to be sure, be careful that as churches we are there long term, that we keep going back, we keep saying, how are you doing faith-wise? How can we help you? What can we do to support you, and so on. So there are some ways that we could potentially think about working with families. What we're going to do now is just have a very short little comfort break, and I've got a video that I absolutely love to share with you. You've probably seen it a million times before, but it's well worth watching again, I think. So it is The Blessing by Children. And so I will play this now. I've got 5 minutes to have a little stretch and grab a drink, and then we'll come back together to continue talking about this topic.
And
Great, super. Sorry, somebody was saying to me that when I click on all the, I'm fiddling on the screen doing various different windows and things, it keeps putting boxes over. I'm sorry about that. I can't quite, I'm not as technologically gifted as perhaps many of you, sorry about that. But I absolutely love that. I love that film. It just oozes that thing of, you know, worth and value of children and their faith, but also inclusivity. So many different ages and stages, different cultures, different backgrounds, many different abilities and disabilities, all there together, worshipping. And so I absolutely love that clip. Just noticed a few things there that you've been popping in the chat, really interesting conversations. Yes, I'll send these slides on to you later today or tomorrow, for those who are asking. But I think a really good point somebody was making there about walking through grief with families and being really aware of those poignant experiences and so on that they have been through, and how we can do that as well is so challenging. But again, we don't know unless we listen and have those conversations. And as well about people are saying there about families with little or no faith, and that's in some churches. I was hearing that that was a really thriving ministry, that sense of outreach. But in the majority of churches that I spoke to, that was really challenging and really difficult, just with all of the barriers and restrictions and everything that were going on at the time. So absolutely, the need to reach out is so key as well. So thinking about evaluating existing approaches, I've put a few different ways of evaluating on there. Of course, there's many different things. When I was talking to a colleague, so I'm just going to do that screen share again. When I was talking to a colleague in the Netherlands, she talked about an X-ray, the pandemic being like an X-ray, in that it basically helped us to see things that were always there, but we could see them much more clearly. And I think that's really true, hence why there's an X-ray there. Things that perhaps we were annoyed about before, now we don't have time to be annoyed and ignore them, we just get rid of them. Things that we thought were really valuable before, we've held them even tighter and treasured them even closer. And I think this is true for our children's ministry as well. When I said that early on, I was looking at some of the online activities that were provided. And I mean, the first thing I would say is absolutely incredible creativity and adaptivity to all these people who were producing without any notice, without any planning, often without many skills, and suddenly upskilling with all their technology skills and so on, providing all of this material. It was just incredible to see that. And even though these people were juggling 1,000,001 things, still they were devoting that time to ministering with children, which is incredible. And so I absolutely want to affirm that, and I don't want it to sound like I was pointing fingers at it, but I think there's always ways that we can improve what we're doing. And I think what it highlighted for me that was, to begin with, I thought some of the things that I noticed were perhaps there because of the pandemic pressures, and people were finding it tricky to do things a certain way. But as I talked to more and more people, I realized that actually some of these practices are perhaps there in our face-to-face meetings pre-COVID, up and down the country in the various church halls with children. And so I think there are things that we need that have become more intensified, we've become more aware of because of the pandemic. So it's really good to just be aware of them as we move forward. And so here's, that was just, yeah, a graph to show what people were thinking about. So children don't sit still. I think that's kind of a self-explanatory thing, really. But I think often we assume they do. Often we just think, well, you know what, it's easier if they just sit there quietly while I tell the story. And but actually, what's our style of delivery, and how can we meet their needs in that way? Children are curious beings. They learn through exploring. And this thing of how can are we teaching things that we want to do? You know, for example, you know, today I want to teach you about Ruth because I like it as a story. Or are we teaching things and exploring things with them because they are interested and it arises from them? Is it child-led, or are we kind of leading that? But also, what's the purpose and the aim of what we're doing? Is it to kind of fill as much Bible knowledge into them as we can while they're still listening? Or are we trying to connect the Bible with their relevant life today? Are we trying to equip and empower them in their discipleship with Jesus? And as somebody was saying, how about equipping them with their with outreach to the community, with sharing the love of Jesus with their friends? How can we do that? But also, what kind of faith are we trying to encourage in them? Is it an adult type faith? Do we want them to just be able to explain everything and reason and so on? Or are we treasuring and valuing that easy, trusting sort of faith and easy accepting faith that they have in childhood? So really to think about what is our purpose, because as I've spoken to many people through this, it's been like, well, we don't really know. We're just kind of buffeted around because of everything that's going on. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to really think, okay, hang on a minute, what is our purpose? And therefore then how can we work towards that, rather than feeling like we've got to try and do all these different sorts of activities and programs. But within that, what role do children have to play? And, you know, are they kind of exploring, as I said before, are they saying what topics they want us to be doing? Are we exploring with them? What is their sort of role as part of this ministry? And what sort of faith are we fostering in them? Is it a kind of a resourceful faith, something that every single week they leave our session and they take that learning with them, and it feeds into their onward faith journey? Or is it something that's quite separate and compartmentalized? And but also in terms of how resilient is the faith? So we've talked a lot about resiliency as part of the pandemic, but how resilient is their faith? Is it able to kind of withstand these knocks when things like bereavements happen, when there are losses in terms of a parent's job, or so many other things? How do we help the children to connect their faith with that? What sort of faith is it? Or is it simply that they're gaining knowledge and so on? And so I think they are really good questions for us to be kind of asking as we're evaluating what we've done previously, what we're doing now, and what we're wanting to do in the future. And so thinking then, how can we move forward? So I've put listen, and try to then meet those needs. And I think this is so key. As churches, so often we just think, well, do you know what? I've got a book here which has got some really good sessions in. It's nice and easy. I'm just going to do that, you know. Or my preference is I like to kind of, I don't know, paint. So let's just do painting every single week. But actually, how can we listen and meet needs? And I think that's a real training need, actually, for those of you who are involved in training people involved in children's ministry teams, in terms of how to support volunteers and paid workers, all sorts of workers in children and family ministry, to listen and how to have those conversations, and therefore then how to move forward from that and meet those needs appropriately. So listen to their needs, but also it's not about the program necessarily. And I think this is something, as I look back upon my many years doing various different kids work and so on, I've often been so obsessed with spending hours and hours and hours sorting out this program and getting it all tickety-boo and dotting the T's, I's, crossing the T's, all that. But actually, it's about the people and those kind of role models of faith, those people who show the child what it's like to pray, for someone to die, and then how does my faith then carry on after that, after I've prayed? And these are the kind of things that the children need to be seeing. The children need to be seeing people who see Bible truths and live by them. And so in these ways, actually, the program is good, you know, and I'm not saying don't sort of do one, but the people are so important. And this is why, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of segregating the adults and children, it's such a shame when that happens, because they lose that opportunity to see those role models of faith. I think adopting a child-led ethos within your practice is really important. Within the education sort of sector, especially the early years, we talk a lot about this, that it should be led by the child. So asking them, you know, what groups do you think we should run? What should we do in those groups? What kind of topics would you find helpful? You may have come across the book, Children as Theologians, but thinking, especially as they get older, you know, are we encouraging them to be part of the formation and the development of these groups that we're running, the activities that we're running? Or are we just dictating and assuming what they want and what they need and so on? So really, I think even more moving forward through the pandemic, to have this child-led ethos is so key, bearing in mind what I was saying earlier about the individual experiences that everybody's had. But building bridges across boundaries. For those of you in the Church of England background at the moment, growing faith is a big area of interest, and this is this sort of thing. So rather than children seeing things very separately or living their experiences very separately, to kind of build bridges across the boundaries. This kind of idea, you know, I go to a parents' evening at my kids' school to find out how they're getting on so that I can then help them with their spellings a bit more, or help them with their maths or that kind of thing. Could we cultivate that sort of thing so that actually there's more of a partnership with parents and churches? We're working together, we're collaborating. And actually at the moment, I think for myself, I'm involved in running various kids groups. If I walk up to a parent and say, so how's your child getting on this week with their faith? How are they praying? How are they doing this? It would seem a little bit strange, if I'm honest, because I've never really done that. So I'm speaking to myself just as much as everyone else here. But actually, if we can try and have an ethos, as we're returning, we've got an opportunity now to do some new things. If we can have that ethos of having those conversations and that partnership and working together, then actually it won't seem strange that we talk to them and say, you know, how can we help your child if they're kind of struggling to read the Bible or whatever. So really thinking about building these bridges. And this thing, no, it's not one size fits all. Again, back to what I said earlier about this individual experience. It's impossible now for us to have this, you know, Sunday morning group for 1 hour that everybody just does the same thing, because they all have had such different experiences. And again, thinking of children with no faith or very little involvement and so on. So I think actually with this notion of not one size fits all, actually we need to work a lot more in small groups rather than kind of a bigger groups, thinking individually or very small groups. And again, this is a training need, because you know, for many of the volunteers I speak to, they feel lacking in confidence of how to talk to children about their faith. Well, actually, I think with a little bit of training and a little bit of encouragement and support and empowering and equipping, we could see a real transformation in these volunteers to actually be significantly investing in the lives of the children in their churches. And so trying to see a shift from things, so it's not just kind of, let's do a scavenger hunt because it's entertaining, but let's do a scavenger hunt and see how we can link it with a prayer activity or something, so that everything that is happening, we can link it in. Super. Now, another point as part of that, and I think we need to be very aware of this as we're kind of evaluating and re-looking at what we are doing and how we're coming out of this pandemic, what our ministry will look like, is this thing of professional children's and family ministry versus good enough. Now, I remember back when I became a mum, of course, the whole spectrum of emotions were there, and all the time, of course, pretending that everything was fine when I was struggling, when I was exhausted, and all these sorts of things. But when I heard David Winnicott's idea of this, the good enough parent, I loved it, because it totally takes the pressure off. I don't need to be perfect. My house doesn't need to be pristine. I need to be good enough that I'm there for my kids, that they know I care, they know I love them, and that that I'm a reliable being in their life. And I think the same is true with our ministries. Of course, like I said earlier, that there is absolutely a place for professional components and professional people and professional parts, but we don't all need to be of that sort of standard. And I think, you know, sometimes people feel that pressure of having to produce a kind of Broadway level production on YouTube each week or something. But actually, there's many other things on YouTube that kids could tune into and watch for that. So perhaps do that and free yourself up half of your week that you are going to spend video recording and editing and so on, and use that time to go off and to send little messages to kids, or phone them up, or go around a visit, speak to the parents, and do that relational sort of time. And so I really think, again, from a kind of training perspective, to be kind of trying to spread this kind of ethos. Not that I'm saying let's not go for kind of good quality children's work, because it's not that at all, but let's take the pressure off people who are feeling, oh my goodness, I can't get involved because I could never be that good. I can never be quite like that. But actually we want to be kind of instilling in people, these are the qualities that we need. We need to be good enough at caring and sharing your faith with children, and that's good enough, you know. And so actually, you know, how can we perhaps try and foster that sort of ethos as we're sort of moving forward. Couple more slides, I'm very aware of the time. Thinking about the role of children in the church. Why do children come to church? The answer for many might be because my parents tell me I have to, or because they drag me along. I don't have any choice. Perhaps they come because they absolutely love meeting together with other kids. They love seeing the faith community as a whole. Perhaps they love worshipping, learning about God, or whatever. But actually, it would be really good. And one day I'd like to do some research with children from this perspective. But until then, you can do this in your own kind of context in terms of having those conversations, having those dialogues. What is bringing the children to church? Why are they coming? How do they feel when they arrive? Are they excited, or are they fed up and they didn't want to be there? But how do they feel when they leave? Are they glad they came? Are they going away feeling really close to Jesus, feeling that they've learned more about the Bible, feeling that they've had a great time worshipping with other kids? What is the experience for them? And I think that's really important, that we sort of, again, from a training sort of perspective, from a resourcing perspective, that we encourage local churches to do this, to have this conversation with children. What are they? Why are they coming? How are they feeling? What's the experience like? But then this thing of having a role to play as well. You know, so do they? I know it's tricky again with COVID, but can they be welcoming on the door or something? Can they be doing some of the prayers, or perhaps the Bible reading? Could they lead one of the games? Could they do the register even? Could they do the reward chart? Perhaps they could help you to decide the teaching topics. Perhaps they could think of the questions for the quiz or something like this. But actually giving children this role gives them such a tremendous sense of worth and value, and it makes them want to be there, and it makes them feel valued and part of what's going on. And also this thing, do children have a voice? And this for me is one of the kind of abiding things that's come out of this research, is that so many people that I spoke to just felt that there perhaps was never a great strength of voice provided to children, but that the pandemic has really pushed that out even further. And you know, so this thing of where do they sit? How is the room laid out? What activities are provided? What are they learning about? How do they pray? Do they have to stand up and do the actions if they don't want to, you know? But also, you know, I've heard of churches having children's PCCs and that kind of thing. And all of these ways provide children the chance to have a voice. And as we finish off and kind of draw together, this is a quote from, you may have heard Chris Whitty mentioned this particular report, the COVID decade it's called, and it talks about the impact on society of COVID. And it's basically saying here that history has shown us that pandemics and other crises can be catalysts to rebuild society in new ways. I think we found that with children's ministry too, but that this requires vision and interconnectivity between policymakers at local, regional and national levels. And so this is kind of, as we're finishing off, this is what I really want to encourage us as a group of people who care about children and family ministry to really be rising up and united in this, because so many people were saying to me as part of this research that child serving ministry wasn't as high a priority through COVID as adult serving ministry. And there's complications and reasons because of that, because the restrictions make it hard, of course. But I do worry as we move forward, you know, this year, next year, the year after, if it continues to be the case that we're investing more, or perhaps children's ministry is being invested in less, I think that is a concern. And so I think looking for opportunities as people who care about this sector to kind of rise up for that, and to really champion for the place of the child and for the profile of the child. You know, we've seen in terms of medical advances that have happened due to kind of people working together, so many new treatments and so on. You know, and I think as people who are interested and invested in this ministry, we can do that. And so, you know, thinking of policies and strategies, but also mutually supporting and mentoring children's leaders. I know there's loads of Facebook groups and people can go and get help, but perhaps there are opportunities here for some organisations, over to you really on this one, who could actually perhaps organise this a bit more, to have a bit more of a structured thing of mentoring children's leaders. Those people who are kind of just getting their head around things perhaps could be partnered up or have a few people together, and they would be a bit intentional about supporting one another through the work that they're doing. Thinking also about facilitating children's teams. This was something which came through many times, was that churches who, individuals who didn't feel terribly confident with children's ministry in the first place, to then get resources and try and adapt them to their setting was a big challenge. So I think that's a training thing, but also perhaps a mentoring thing in terms of how can we support people in adapting resources and finding things that are suitable for their context and so on. And similarly for Christian parents and grandparents, how can we very intentionally change this ethos so that we see it more of a partnership and that we're supporting them in that. And then empowering children as leaders. One of my biggest passions, and I'm sure is for you as well. And how can we do that despite all of these restrictions and so on that we're having? How can we empower those children right now and in the months ahead and years ahead to be kind of forming and shaping the ministry that's happening? So that was the all that I had to say. There were some of the kind of themes and so on coming out. But thank you so much for being here and for joining us today. And I know there's been a busy kind of conversation going on in the chat there. And it's really great to just be here this afternoon with a group of people who care about children and family ministry. So I just really want to encourage you and, encourage you to be bold, to be brave, to keep experimenting, keep trying, keep going, and keep standing up for these children in your context, whatever that may be. So we'll finish in a moment, but thank you. And just to let you know, I've got in about a month, I'm going to be doing like an under fives. It's not at all a training thing, but it's more a kind of round table discussion about practices that kind of practices which are effective at supporting children's faith and spirituality in that under fives age range. So I'll just I'll email you all afterwards the recording and the slides from this, but I'll also add a little note in about that in case that's of interest for you. But thank you so much. If anybody wants to join me at some point for a smaller scale conversation, feel free to email me. I'd love to hear from you, and especially if you are working really hard at connecting age groups and your ministry is really doing this intergenerational thing. I'd love to hear from you, because I'm working with a colleague to try and draw together some lots of these practices that are happening intergenerationally and look for some kind of principles and great ideas that we can share more widely. So if you want to drop me an email, if you're doing that kind of thing, I'd love to hear from you. But thank you so much, and enjoy the sunshine. I've got lovely sunshine here. So thanks so much for joining. We'll see you soon. Thank you.